The wind howled through the jagged peaks, each gust carrying the taste of ice and desolation. At the edge of a remote mountain pass, the sky stretched heavy, its clouds dark and unforgiving. Alone in the wild, a dog huddled close to the boulder that served as its only shelter, trembling not from the cold, but from the abandonment that had gripped its heart. Eyes wide with fear and confusion, the dog's once strong frame was now gaunt, its fur matted with a mixture of dirt, rain, and blood. In the distance, the faint sound of a human voice broke through the howling wind. A voice that had promised safety, warmth, and love. But promises mean nothing in the wild. They are easily lost to the elements, just like the humans who made them. The dog could no longer remember how it had come to this desolate place, but it could feel the bitter sting of hunger, the deep ache of loneliness, and the gnawing sensation of helplessness. Its only companions were the cold stone beneath it and the mournful wind. Yet there was hope. As faint as it was, it flickered, like the dim glow of a lantern far off in the night, guiding it toward something, someone. A rescue was coming. The sun had barely kissed the horizon when they left him there. The man had been kind at first, gentle even, but somewhere along the way, something had changed. His touch, once tender, had become distant, colder, more detached. The dog could feel it like a shift in the air, a faint, subtle tension that had woven itself between them over the past few days. The bond they once shared, the warmth of companionship, was beginning to fray. They had driven for miles. The truck rattled over the rough terrain, its engine humming steadily beneath them, but the dog had sensed the unease that hung thick in the air. The man's voice, usually filled with affection, had become clipped, sharp. The dog's ears perked up at the sound of his name, but there was something hollow in the man's tone, a hollow that the dog couldn't quite place. Was it disappointment? Resignation? Or perhaps it was something more heartbreaking, the silent acknowledgement that this was the end. The man had pulled the truck to the side of the road, where the dense woods met the steep mountain pass. The dog watched with a curious gaze as the man opened the door. The world beyond the truck seemed to stretch endlessly, the tall pines whispering in the wind, the scent of the earth rich with decay. For a moment, the dog felt the air shift, as if something was about to happen, something it couldn't comprehend. Its tail wagged instinctively, and it followed the man to the ground. But the man didn't kneel down to greet it, didn't ruffle its fur or offer the usual reassuring smile. Instead, he stepped back, his eyes cold, the faintest flicker of guilt flashing across his face as he shut the door behind him. "Stay here," the man said, but his words lacked the warmth that had once made them feel like a promise. There was no love in them now, no comfort, just an empty command. The dog tilted its head, uncertain but obedient. It stood still, watching the man, feeling a strange knot twist in its chest. There was no wagging tail now, only confusion and a deep, growing sense of unease. The truck's engine rumbled to life again, and the dog's heart began to race. It didn't understand. Why had they stopped here? Why was the man so distant? Why did he seem to want to leave so quickly? The tires screeched as the truck pulled away, the dirt and gravel flying behind it in a cloud of dust. The dog stood frozen, staring at the fading taillights, its body trembling with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The world felt suddenly vast, too vast. The mountain pass seemed endless, the woods dark and unfathomable. The man was gone, the truck was gone, and the dog was alone. It didn't move. Its body refused to respond, its mind racing through a million thoughts, none of them making sense. The seconds stretched, then minutes, then what felt like hours. It remained at the side of the road, as though waiting for the man to return, to call out to it, to tell it that everything was fine, that this was just another stop on their journey. But no such words came, only silence. The dog could feel the sun climbing higher, casting long shadows on the rocky terrain, but still it didn't move. A breeze brushed past its face, carrying with it the scent of pine, of earth, and something else, a faint, distant smell that lingered in the air, like a reminder of something forgotten. The dog's stomach growled, a hollow, painful sound that seemed to echo in the empty landscape. It sniffed the air again, searching for some sign of life, something familiar, something that could lead it back to the man. But the world was vast, uncaring, and unyielding. Its paws ached, worn from walking the hard, unforgiving road. The dog's coat, once glossy and thick, was now matted with dirt and moisture. Its ribs jutted out, the harsh reality of hunger making itself known with every shallow breath it took. It had been days since the man had last fed it, days since it had felt the warmth of a meal. Now, there was nothing but hunger, gnawing and relentless, a constant reminder of the growing distance between them. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky, its rays piercing through the trees, casting a soft, golden glow over the land. The dog's eyes grew heavy, the exhaustion of its body catching up to it. It lay down in the dirt, curling up into a tight ball, hoping that if it closed its eyes, maybe, just maybe, it would wake up and find the man sitting there beside it, ready to continue their journey together. But when it opened its eyes again, the landscape had not changed. The road remained empty, devoid of any sign of the life it once knew. Nightfall came quickly, and with it, the biting cold of the mountain air. The dog's body shivered, and its instincts told it to seek shelter. But where? The land around it was barren, a stark and empty expanse that offered no comfort, no refuge from the chill that seemed to seep into its very bones. The dog had learned to survive in the wild, but this was different. This was isolation, abandonment. The weight of it settled on the dog's chest like a stone, heavy and suffocating. The first night was the hardest. The loneliness felt infinite, a wound too deep to heal. The sound of distant coyotes echoed through the air, a reminder that it was not truly alone. But it might as well have been. No one was coming for it. No one would. The days that followed blurred together. The dog moved through the land as if in a daze, its every step an effort, its every breath a struggle. The road it had once walked so confidently now felt like an endless stretch of emptiness, its destination unclear, its path uncertain. The only thing it knew for certain was that the man, the one it had trusted, the one it had loved, was never coming back. And that was the hardest truth of all. The dog's mind began to lose track of time, the days melding together into an indistinct blur of hunger, thirst, and pain. Every scent, every sound, every flicker of movement was a potential promise, a potential signal of rescue. But with each false alarm, the dog's hope dwindled a little more. It learned the hardest lesson of survival: hope could be a painful thing. It was a thing that could hurt you, that could break you, especially when it was never fulfilled. And so the dog kept walking, its eyes searching the landscape for some sign of life, its body growing weaker by the day. It had lost everything: its family, its home, its sense of safety. But it still moved forward, driven by something deep within. It wasn't just the instinct to survive. It was the hope, the tiny flicker deep in its chest, that maybe, just maybe someone would come to its rescue. But for now, the dog was alone, and the mountain pass stretched out before it like an infinite sea, dark and lonely. The journey had just begun, and it wasn't sure how it would end. Days blurred together in a haze of pain, hunger, and cold. The mountain pass had become a cruel companion to the dog, each step more laborious than the last. The once familiar rhythm of its feet on the earth had slowed to a dragging, half-hearted shuffle. Every muscle in its body ached from the constant struggle to survive. The landscape, so vast and unwelcoming, loomed over it like a never-ending expanse of loneliness. With each day that passed, the dog's sense of time faded into nothingness. The world had become a patchwork of moments, brief flashes of reality that drifted in and out of its consciousness. It would wake, bleary-eyed and weak, from an uneasy sleep beneath the sparse trees, and the first thing it would do was sniff the air, hoping to catch the scent of something. Anything that could sustain it. But there was nothing. Just the smell of damp earth, pine, and the sharp bite of wind. The hunger was relentless, a constant gnawing that never let up. The dog's stomach felt hollow, and its ribs seemed to jut out more with every passing hour. The world had grown quiet, too quiet, except for the occasional distant sound of wildlife, the soft rustling of leaves, and the low whistle of the wind. At times, the silence pressed against its ears, almost deafening, until the dog couldn't stand it anymore. The hollow growl of its stomach would break the stillness, its body shaking as it searched for food. Anything that could silence the gnawing ache inside. The dog knew it had to move, had to keep going, but the journey was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a slow, grueling climb toward desperation. Its once strong legs had become fragile, weak, unable to carry it as they once had. Every step felt like a battle, each one harder than the last. The rocky terrain beneath its paws seemed sharper now, every jagged stone threatening to slice through its pads, leaving deep, raw wounds in their wake. Yet it kept going. There was no other choice. The landscape around it had become a labyrinth of rocks and trees, each one feeling like an obstacle, a reminder of its isolation. The mountains loomed over it, tall and unmoving, as if mocking its struggle. The sky had changed, the clouds thickening and growing darker with every passing hour. The first few days of the journey had felt like an adventure, a brief detour on the road. But now the dog understood the cold reality of its situation. This wasn't a trip. This was survival. The mountain winds howled around it, the cold biting through its fur and down to its bones. The dog's coat, once thick and healthy, had become matted and dirty, a reflection of its growing weakness. The weight of isolation hung heavily in the air. There was no sound of human voices here, no familiar hands reaching out to comfort it. The wild was indifferent, relentless, and cruel. Every few hours, the dog would find a small patch of shelter, beneath a tree, against a boulder, or in the hollow of a rock, curling up to rest its weary body. But sleep was never truly peaceful. The cold seeped in, and the hunger gnawed at its insides. The dog would dream, brief flashes of memories it could not place. The face of its owner, the sound of the truck's engine, the warmth of a hand that had once petted it. But those memories faded like smoke when it woke. In the silence, it would press its nose into the dirt, longing for the comfort of a familiar scent, the warmth of the hand that had once fed it. There were moments, fleeting and painful, when the dog wondered if it would ever see a friendly face again. It would look up at the darkening sky, the silhouette of the trees reaching into the heavens like fingers, and wonder if it would be swallowed by the wild forever. It had been abandoned, forgotten, and now it was just another creature trying to survive in a world that had no place for it. But still, the dog pressed on. The only thing it had left was the instinct to keep moving, to push through the growing fatigue and pain. The wild was harsh, and it was getting colder. The air had turned sharp and thin, the wind carrying with it the promise of snow. The ground beneath its paws had become slick with moisture, the rocks slicker than before, turning each step into a dangerous gamble. Yet, there was no time to stop. There was no time to dwell on the pain. Each moment that the dog lingered meant a moment closer to being swallowed by the elements. It had to keep moving, keep searching. Food was scarce. The dog had scavenged what it could, fallen berries, the occasional squirrel, even a patch of tough grass. But nothing was enough to fill the emptiness inside. The wild animals had begun to shy away from it, sensing the dog's weakness. It had lost its edge, its hunting instincts dulled by hunger and exhaustion. The world was no longer its playground. It had become a place of scarcity, of hunger, of survival. One day, as the dog stumbled along a particularly treacherous path, it heard the sound of something moving in the brush. Its ears perked up, the hunger surging within it, pushing it forward. The scent of a deer, fresh and alive, wafted through the air. Its paws moved faster, the adrenaline of the chase coursing through its veins. But as it neared the creature, something inside the dog hesitated. Its once strong legs wavered, its body slowing as it realized how far gone it had become. It was no longer the dog that could catch a deer with ease. It was the dog that struggled to take each step. The deer, sensing the dog's presence, bounded away, its hooves tapping lightly against the earth as it disappeared into the forest. The dog stopped, watching it go, the hunger in its belly sharpening painfully. Its head dropped in defeat. It had failed. The dog sank to its knees, too weak to continue. It had made it this far, through days of hunger, isolation, and physical pain. But it felt like it couldn't go any further. The mountains had beaten it down, reduced it to nothing but a shell of the animal it had once been. The wild had stripped it of its dignity, its strength, and now it was at the mercy of whatever the world had in store for it. But even in that moment of defeat, something deep inside the dog refused to let go. It wasn't ready to die here, not yet. It could feel the ache in its bones, the raw pain of survival, but it still had a flicker of hope left. Maybe it could find food. Maybe it could find shelter. Maybe, just maybe, it could find a way back to the world it once knew. With a low, guttural whine, the dog pushed itself to its feet, its legs shaking beneath it. It took one shaky step, then another. The journey wasn't over. Not yet. The climb was far from over. But with every step, the dog was learning, slowly, painfully, that it had something the mountains could never take from it: the will to live. The wind had shifted overnight, carrying with it the faint promise of warmth. The sun had risen on the third morning since the dog's last hopeful glance toward the horizon. But today, something felt different. The clouds that had been so thick and unrelenting the past few days had parted, allowing a sliver of pale sunlight to break through the veil of gray. It illuminated the dog's path with a soft, almost ethereal glow, as though the world had decided to offer it a brief moment of grace. The dog had grown thinner since the abandonment. Its ribs protruded painfully through its matted fur, and its once bright eyes were now clouded with exhaustion. But there was still a spark inside, a flickering flame that refused to go out, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. As it trudged along the rugged path, its body trembling with each step, that tiny spark flickered in the dog's chest. It had come this far, and it wasn't ready to give up. The world around the dog had become a vast, unyielding landscape. The trees stood tall and silent, their gnarled branches reaching for the heavens, as though they had long since forgotten the warmth of the sun. The earth was hard beneath its paws, the ground uneven, jagged rocks jutting up at random intervals, forcing the dog to navigate with extreme caution. Its once confident stride had diminished to a slow, measured walk, each movement calculated, deliberate, as though its very survival depended on every single step. And yet, despite the wariness of its body, there was something new in the air, an unfamiliar sense of anticipation. The dog had walked this path for so long, so lost in its own thoughts of hunger and despair, that it hadn't noticed the change in the environment around it. The scent of pine and damp earth still filled the air, but now there was a new undertone. A new scent. Something familiar, yet foreign. The faint trace of another presence. The dog's ears pricked up, its gaze snapping to the trees on the far side of the path. Its heart began to race, its pulse quickening. Could it be? Was it finally someone who could help? The wild had offered no respite, no compassion, only the unrelenting push to survive. But now, as it stood still in the thick silence, the dog felt the possibility of something it hadn't dared to hope for in days. A rescue. It could hear the faint crunch of footsteps on the dry leaves in the distance. The sound was soft at first, barely perceptible, but it grew steadily louder, more distinct. The dog's breath caught in its throat as it waited, every fiber of its being focused on that one sound. The world seemed to still, holding its breath as well. And then, through the thicket of trees, the figure emerged. A human. A person. The dog's heart leaped in its chest, its tail instinctively beginning to wag despite the exhaustion that hung over its every movement. It was a stranger, unfamiliar, unknown. But to the dog, this person represented everything it had longed for: safety, warmth, love. The human was tall, dressed in rugged outdoor gear, their face partially obscured by the hood of their jacket. As the figure approached, the dog's instincts kicked in. Cautiously, it stepped forward, one shaky leg at a time. It could feel the weight of the stranger's gaze upon it, the flicker of recognition in their eyes as they saw the frail creature before them. The dog's body trembled, not just from the cold, but from the overwhelming mix of fear, hope, and desperate need. The human stopped a few feet away, their eyes softening as they looked down at the dog. "Hey there." The voice was gentle, soothing, like the calm before a storm. "It's okay. You're safe now." For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The dog's eyes met the stranger's, and something unspoken passed between them. The human's voice was kind, and the dog could sense the warmth in their presence. But the dog didn't trust easily anymore. It had been abandoned once before, left to fend for itself in the cold, cruel wilderness. The memory of that pain, the shock, the confusion, the hollow ache of loneliness, was still fresh in its mind. But something inside the dog told it that this time, this moment, was different. Slowly, hesitantly, the dog took a few cautious steps closer. Its legs shook beneath it, but it kept moving, inching closer to the stranger. The human didn't move, their hands held out in front of them, palms open, offering no threat, only the promise of safety. The dog's breath was shallow, quick, but it took another step forward, its eyes never leaving the human's face. A low whine escaped its throat, a sound that was part relief, part exhaustion, but entirely vulnerable. It was a plea, a cry for comfort, a surrender to the possibility of something better. The stranger knelt down slowly, their movements deliberate and calm. The dog could see the tenderness in their eyes, the compassion that radiated from them like a warmth the dog had long been without. There was no fear in the stranger's gaze, no hesitation, only kindness. The human reached out a hand, palm open, and gently stroked the dog's head. For the first time in what felt like forever, the dog allowed itself to relax. It closed its eyes at the touch, its body trembling, but in a different way now. It was no longer trembling from fear or pain, but from the release of the tension that had built up inside it over days of solitary survival. It felt something stir deep within its chest, a fragile sense of trust, a glimmer of hope. The stranger spoke softly, their voice barely above a whisper. "You've been through so much, haven't you?" They paused, their hand continuing to stroke the dog's matted fur. "But you're safe now. You don't have to be alone anymore." The dog pressed its head into the stranger's hand, its heart swelling with a mix of emotions it hadn't known were still possible. Safety, warmth, the possibility of love. The stranger's touch was soft, but it was also firm, the touch of someone who understood pain, understood loss, and understood the strength it took to keep going, even when the world seemed determined to take everything from you. For the first time since the abandonment, the dog felt something it hadn't dared to feel in days' peace. The world was still vast and uncertain, the mountains still looming, cold and unforgiving. But for now, in this moment, the dog was no longer alone. The stranger was here, offering what it had so desperately needed, a connection, a lifeline. The dog lifted its head, its eyes locking with the human's, and in that gaze there was a promise. A promise that, no matter what the world had thrown at it, it didn't have to face it alone anymore. The human had found it, had saved it when it had long given up on being saved. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the dog realized that maybe, just maybe, it could trust again. The first days of recovery were slow and agonizing, but they were also the first real steps toward healing. The dog's body had been ravaged by its days in the wilderness. Its skin and bones thin, its fur matted and dirty, its muscles weak from hunger and lack of proper care. The wild had taken its toll, stripping the dog of its strength. But there was something indomitable in the way it fought to stay alive, in the resilience that still clung to its spirit like a fragile thread. The stranger, its rescuer, had found the dog, cradled it in their arms, and transported it to a small cabin that would be its home for the coming weeks. The cabin smelled faintly of wood and herbs, a welcoming warmth that immediately put the dog at ease. It was a stark contrast to the cold, unforgiving world the dog had just come from. Here, there was warmth. There was safety, and more than anything, there was kindness. At first, the dog could barely move. Its legs shook beneath it, the weakness in its body preventing it from standing for more than a few moments at a time. But the rescuer was patient. They didn't rush the dog, didn't push it to do anything it wasn't ready for. Instead, they allowed the dog to rest, to recover at its own pace. Every now and then, the rescuer would feed the dog small portions of food, soft, easy to digest meals like warm broth and chunks of meat. The dog devoured the food with a desperation it couldn't control, but the rescuer never hurried, always offering comfort with each bite, never forcing it to eat more than it could handle. As the days passed, the dog's strength began to return in small, incremental ways. The feeling in its legs began to return, and while the pain from its raw, calloused paws was still a constant reminder of the harsh journey it had endured, the stiffness in its body started to loosen. Its coat, once dull and matted with dirt and grime, began to show signs of life again. The dog's fur began to shine once more, though it still held the scars of the wilderness. Tangled patches of fur that would take time to grow back, dark spots where the skin had been rubbed raw. But the dog could feel the change. It could feel its body knitting itself back together, inch by inch. There was still a lingering fear, though, a hesitation in the dog's eyes whenever the rescuer approached too quickly, a slight flinch when the stranger's hand reached out too suddenly. The dog had learned to survive alone in the wilderness, but it had also learned that not all hands were kind. Not all voices were gentle. There was still a guardedness, a cautious wariness that remained despite the rescuer's unrelenting care and patience. The dog was learning again what it meant to trust, but it was slow. The scar of abandonment ran deep, and though the dog wanted to believe, wanted to feel safe again, the journey to trust would take time. But the rescuer never pushed. They gave the dog space when it needed it, allowed the silence to fill the room between them as they worked through the process of healing, both physical and emotional. At night, the rescuer would sit by the fire, quietly reading or writing, and the dog would lie on its bed, watching the flickering flames. Sometimes, the rescuer would gently coax the dog to lie closer to them, resting a hand on its head or its back, and the dog would comply, but only for a short while. It wasn't ready yet to accept the closeness it once knew. The wound of being left behind was still fresh, still aching in ways the dog couldn't understand. But the days turned into weeks and the dog began to settle. It started to trust the routine, the regular meals, the walks outside, the quiet companionship of the rescuer's presence. On one of the mornings, after a particularly restful night, the dog woke to find its paws no longer hurting quite as much. It stood up on its own, stretching out its legs, feeling the muscles working with a newfound strength. The dog didn't understand what had changed, but it felt different, stronger, more capable. It followed the rescuer outside that day, hesitant but determined. The world beyond the cabin was still vast, still intimidating, but it was no longer the same wild, menacing place it had once been. The forest seemed less oppressive, more like a part of a world it could belong to again. The dog stood in the clearing, its nose twitching as it inhaled the fresh air, its paws feeling the cool, soft earth beneath them. The rescuer stood beside it, a presence of reassurance, their voice low and comforting. "You're doing great," the rescuer said softly, not as praise, but as a simple, factual acknowledgement of the dog's progress. It wasn't much, but to the dog, it meant everything. The dog's tail began to wag ever so slightly, the first real sign of connection it had allowed itself since the moment of abandonment. The bond between them, fragile at first, was beginning to take root, slowly growing stronger with each passing day. The dog no longer flinched when the rescuer reached out, no longer recoiled from the touch of a human hand. There was a trust beginning to form, built not in grand gestures or sweeping promises, but in the simple act of consistency. Every meal, every walk, every night by the fire. These small, everyday acts were the foundation of something the dog hadn't thought possible in so long: security. It wasn't just the physical healing that was taking place. The dog was beginning to heal emotionally too. Slowly but surely. It was learning that not every person would leave, that not every touch would bring pain. It was learning that there was more to the world than abandonment, that love and care still existed, even after everything had fallen apart. The rescuer had never asked the dog to forget its past, never pushed it to move on from the scars it carried. Instead, they offered the dog something more valuable than any quick fix: time. The time to heal at its own pace, the time to rebuild what had been broken, and the time to remember what it was like to be loved, to be wanted. As the weeks continued, the dog's transformation became more evident. It moved with more purpose now, its steps steadier, its energy renewed. Its fur grew back fuller and softer, the dullness of its coat replaced with the healthy sheen of a dog that had found its way back to health. The rescuer had taken the time to care for the dog, not just physically, but emotionally, offering the patience the dog so desperately needed to regain its confidence. And in return, the dog began to offer the rescuer something just as precious: a quiet but unwavering trust. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't just about getting through each day. The dog had learned to trust again, had learned to believe in the possibility of a better life. It had learned that healing didn't happen all at once, that it was a slow process, a steady climb back from the depths of despair. But as the dog stood on its paws, stronger and more whole with each passing day, It realized that it had not just survived, it had begun to thrive. The healing, both of its body and its soul, was just beginning, but the dog knew it had found a home, a place where it could finally rest, heal, and live again. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the dog realized it was not just a survivor anymore. It was a part of something greater. It had a future that was no longer defined by the harshness of the wild, but by the kindness, patience, and love that was now its reality. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm, golden hue over the landscape. The dog stood at the edge of the clearing, its eyes gazing out across the vast expanse of forest and mountains. The world that had once seemed so overwhelming, so unforgiving, now felt different, more inviting, more familiar. The dog's body was stronger now, its coat thick and healthy, its spirit no longer tethered by the haunting memories of abandonment. Beside it stood the rescuer, a quiet presence that had become as steady and constant as the wind itself. The bond between them had grown in ways that neither had expected. What had started as a simple act of mercy had transformed into something deeper, an unspoken understanding, a partnership forged through patience, kindness, and shared moments of quiet healing. The rescuer's hand rested gently on the dog's back, a silent gesture of solidarity, of knowing that the journey they had both been on had brought them to this place of peace. The dog's tail wagged slowly, the first true sign of joy it had allowed itself to feel in so long. It had learned to trust again, to believe that the world still held moments of tenderness and safety. The wild had once taken so much, but it had also given the dog a chance to rediscover its strength, its resilience, and its capacity to love and be loved. And as the two of them stood there, watching the sun dip behind the hills, the dog knew one thing for certain: it had come home. Not just to the cabin, but to itself. The journey was far from over, but the path ahead no longer seemed so uncertain. The future was bright, and for the first time in a long while, the dog was ready to embrace it.